Welcome to Africa's Vital Role in Christianity, and I am your host, Kathy Lucas. And thank you for joining me today. I am back with another episode that I hope will help Christians of all ethnic groups and non-believers to answer some questions about Africa's significant role in the Bible. Without Africa and Africans, there would not have been Christianity. God used black people to change the world forever. Christianity is not a white man's religion. It belongs to all people. But it was black Africans that made it possible to understand some of the deepest truths about Christianity. We cannot begin to understand our worth or the faith that we proclaim if we don't understand Christian history. So I'm hoping today that many questions will be answered and that the Lord Yeshua is glorified. Since my last recording, we have encountered a deadly pandemic, better known as COVID-19. I do hope that you're staying safe and following safety precautions because I feel that this is the only way that we're going to get through this pandemic. I urge everyone to please wear your mask, wash your hands, and practice social distancing. Being socially responsible saves lives and will help us to get back to our normal standard of living. I do have the greatest faith that we as a nation will get through these challenging times. So without keeping you any longer, it is time for us to take this journey. Today's subject is about how African Americans shaped global evangelicalism in African Christianity. For my first-time listeners, I think it's very important that I explain why I am doing this podcast and why it has so much value to me. As a black African American, I know that our continental Africans and African Americans have played a crucial role in the development of Christianity, and it is very important that we know this so that we don't throw away our inheritance. I also realize that Christianity has been greatly manipulated to dismiss our role in biblical history. For my first-time listeners, please check out my podcast entitled, Is Christianity the White Man's Religion? This is one of the greatest lies of the enemy to have black people believe that Christianity belongs to the white man. So for these reasons, I and many of the black and white Christian apologists and Christian educators are committed to breaking down these strongholds and setting the record straight and reclaiming our accomplishments that rightfully should be credited to us. So here are a few basic facts about today's presentation, and we're going to find out just how African Americans shaped African Christian history. The growth of African Christianity in the last half century is one of the most remarkable facts in the history of world Christianity. And here are the statistics that demonstrate that fact. From about 9 to 10 million Christians on the continent in 1900, represented only 9% of the entire population. Back then, Africans only represented 1.4% of the entire world Christian community. Fast forward 100 years later, Africa transformed into an era experiencing the fastest church growth of any region in the world. According to a 2010 assessment, African Christians in the subcontinent represented 63% of the population, and today the church in Africa accounts for 24% of the world Christian population. Here are two questions. Number one, Who should take credit for this? And number 2, what is African about African Christianity? Before we get to that, let me explain the Eurocentric narrative that has been accepted for centuries, and that many in the present culture believe that African Christianity is a Western creation. Many of the Christian books published by Eurocentric authors tell of a false narrative that Christianity was brought and introduced to Africa by white missionaries. However, despite this falsehood, this narrative ignores the fact that the vast majority of Africans historically never met a white missionary or had minimal exposure to one, which means that the gospel of Christ was brought to Africa by other Africans. Eurocentric manipulation ignores the fact that the rich history of Christian kingdoms had already existed in indigenous Africa, and to add insult to injury, ignores the pre-existing religious heritage where God was already at work. And this baseless assumption reflects the thinking that European or Western project and activities are all there is to the story of modern Christianity. So now, with this information that I have presented to you thus far, you can clearly see that both questions have been answered. But with the remaining information that I will present in this podcast, we'll go deeper to answer question number 2. Just how African is African Christianity? Beloved, when true history of any given subject is ignored, it can be compared to a puzzle that has missing pieces. I have come to set the record straight by bringing the missing pieces today. So next, we will talk about the Black transatlantic movement associated with Black Christians that were a part of the story. And this great Black Christian contribution remains ignored due to Eurocentric and Western bias. The fact is, on the continent of Africa, it was Africans, either repatriated and liberated slaves, who laid the foundation stones of the church. Repatriated and liberated slaves took the gospel to Africa. There was a transnational connectivity that took place between African Black Americans and continental Africans for a very long time. Their sense of shared identity and common ancestry allowed them to make a common cause to complete projects. Africans played a great role in the abolition movement. This Back to Africa movement took place from 1820 to 1890. Their actions were shaped by the abolition movement, and blacks were a part of that conversation, and they themselves agreed that they would make the ideal missionaries for African people. This Back to Africa movement focused on 2 settings, and one of those was Sierra Leone, established as a home for free blacks from Britain and North America, and governed as a British colony from 1808. The Black Christians who established the first church in modern Africa did so in Sierra Leone. Also, the oldest Baptist church in Africa is the Bright Hope Baptist Church, who welcomed its first female pastor, Pastor Linda Karoma. So we can clearly see that the story of modern African Christianity began with the migration of Black Christians and not the arrival of white missionaries. Sierra Leone led the first mass movement to Christianity in the modern period in the 1820s. There were probably more Christians in Sierra Leone than in the rest of tropical Africa. The colony became a major center of Christianity and became home to institutions that pioneered the study of African languages, trained the highest number of African ministers in the 19th century. Next, I will talk about the early pioneers who made this connectivity happen. Alexander Cromwell, a Christian, stated that Sierra Leone was deemed the cradle of missions, the mother of churches, and the parent of colonies. It was home to the oldest Christian community in sub-Saharan Africa. Also, a land settlement identified on the West African coast named Monrovia after President James Monroe. Liberia was a black republic that would be a beacon of light in Africa for redemption and emancipation. Earlier in the podcast, I discussed the oldest Baptist church in Sierra Leone, and this is attributed to the dynamic leadership of Lot Carey. Next, we have Alexander Cromwell, who was born in New York, had a BA from Cambridge University, spent 20 years as an educator in Liberia, training for a host of indigenous Christians as teachers and catechists. It is important that we recognize that these people were marked with freedom, faith, and education, and that these men were Protestants and maintained a deep religious conviction. As I wrap up this podcast, I hope that I sufficiently provided information that continues to fill the void of our rich African history. I'm thoroughly convinced that no manipulation or distortion will never deter the plans of God. After many years of inhuman slavery, both groups connected with an undeterred will to take and receive the gospel to Africa for kingdom building, and those seeds were planted in a mighty way that has resulted in Africa having the largest Christian population in the entire world. How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in his excellent word. What more can he say than to you he hath said, to you who for refuge to Jesus have fled? My older saints recognize that I just quoted the Christian hymn, How Firm a Foundation. Also, here's another fact that I will share. Did you know by the year 2050, 1 in every 4 Americans will be African Christian and non-Christian? I sincerely hope that you enjoyed today's podcast. Today's references include Dr. Jehu Hansels, that's spelled Jehu, Jehu Hansels, Hanciles, The Black Atlantic and Shaping of African History from 1820 and 1920, found on YouTube. I strongly recommend that you go and listen to the entire presentation, for I only covered a few vital points. Next, internet article. Bright Hope Baptist Church welcomes first female pastor from Africa's oldest Baptist church. That will be found on www.philasun.com. Phila as in Philadelphia, Philasun. Next, the great hoax. Christianity is the white man's religion, found on hopeschool.org. Next, the future is African and the United States is not prepared, found in www.washingtonpost.com. Christian hymn, How Firm a Foundation, written in 1787, the author John Rippon, that's spelled Rippon, that will be found in public domain.